Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for our Lunch and Learn today. My name is Callie, and I'm the Curator of Education here at the History Center. And I'd like to welcome everyone who's joining us in person and those of us who are joining online. We are so happy you are here. And just as a reminder, if you would like to ask a question, if you are online, you can just type it into the chat box and Cheyenne will relay it to us. And for the rest of us in person, if you don't mind just holding your questions until the end, we'll make sure to leave some time so you can ask our very special presenter any questions you might have. But today I am so excited to welcome Emily Coughlin today for her Lunch and Learn about the RMS Titanic. Currently, Emily is the Deputy Director of the Museum Trustee Association. But you may have seen her before because she was formerly our collections manager here at the History Center. And on top of all of that, she's also a big Titanic enthusiast who even did her master's degree doing research on the Titanic. So you are in for a real treat today, and let's give our special speaker a warm welcome.
Hello. Okay, can everybody hear me? Yeah, it's on. Is that better? Cheyenne, help.
You might just have to stand a little bit closer as well.
Oh, is it that one?
Yeah.
The one that I have to be like on top of?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's fine. How about now? Can everybody hear me? Okay, I'll try to talk loud. So as Callie said, my name is Emily Coughlin. I have been researching, studying Titanic since I was 13. I did my master's thesis on it. I did a thesis on their exhibits and their traveling shows and their permanent exhibits and museums and how they use personal items from passengers to tell the story and the emotional effect that it has on people. So let's get started. All right, so I'm sure, hopefully everyone here has heard of it. Have you seen the movie? No. Oh, okay. It's good, you should watch it at some point. So I'm sure everybody's heard of it. As he said, there was a very famous movie done about it. But before we really get into the ship itself and what happened, a little background. So Titanic was designed by the White Star Line. It was owned by the White Star Line out of Liverpool, England. And it was built by Harland and Wolff in Belfast, Northern Ireland now. And it was what was called an Olympic class of ships because at this time, Industrial Revolution, everything was bigger and better. So it was the Olympic, Titanic, and Britannic. They were the three sister ships, and they were almost identical. Britannic ended up being a hospital ship, so not that one. But Olympic and Titanic were almost identical with a couple things that were different. The Titanic itself had the Café Parisien, and then it also had private promenades outside a couple of the suites that Olympic did not have. But if you don't already know this, the majority of pictures that you see of Titanic are actually of the Olympic. Unless it is of these two things, it is most likely the Olympic because Titanic sank before they did like the full marketing shoot, which at the time photography was expensive. So why would you do it if you already have it? Only pictures that you really see that are from the ship itself were taken by Father Francis Brown. He was a first class passenger, boarded in Southampton, got off in Queenstown, which was the last stop. And his photographs, you see them a lot in collections, but they've been monetized now, so they're a little harder to get to. All right, so Titanic's construction. This is the Harland and Wolff shipyard. The keel was laid on March 31st, 1909, and the hull was successfully launched on May 31st, 1911. She didn't complete her sea trials until April 2nd, 1912, and after completing her sea trials, immediately went to Southampton to start picking up passengers. On April 10th, 1912, Before it officially started the maiden voyage, this is actually a still from a film that was done of people along the Titanic at Southampton. And she went from Southampton to Cherbourg, France, and then Queenstown, Ireland on the 11th before she started heading to New York. Okay, so before the incident happened, April 11th, 12th, 13th, pretty normal days. People are just enjoying the cruise. Titanic is speeding ahead towards New York. But April 14th, it was any other day. Passengers were just doing their thing, but they didn't know that on the bridge they were getting iceberg warnings. The sea was really calm, so they were like, well, we don't see anything. We're good. Let's keep going. But instead of being cautious like some of the other ships in the area, Titanic forged ahead. And as we all know, it did not end well for them. One more thing I will say before I get into this was that because Britannic and Titanic were sister ships, you see in the movies that Titanic had like all this fanfare. It really didn't. Olympic was the first. Olympic had the fanfare. Titanic was just another new ship. So it was exciting, but obviously it's known for something else. So we're just blowing through the history. At 11:39 on April 14th, lookout Frederick Fleet spotted the iceberg. He phoned down to the bridge in the hopes that they would stop the ship or get it to turn, but they were going too fast, and at 11:40, Titanic collided with the iceberg on her starboard side. Now, the ship was designed with 16 watertight compartments, and it was, the unsinkable Titanic. So 4 of the compartments could be full of water and she could stay afloat. But when they hit the iceberg, it ripped a hole into the 5th compartment. So at that point, her fate was sealed and there was nothing that anyone could do. At 12:05, Captain Smith gave the order to start uncovering the lifeboats, and women and children start gathering them and getting them in the lifeboats and abandoning ship. At 12:25 was when Carpathia got Titanic's distress call and started to make the 58-mile journey towards where she was. At 12:45, the first the first lifeboat number 7, was lowered, and it only had 28 people in it, and these lifeboats could hold almost 70. But people didn't believe this ship was sinking. They just kind of thought, there's no way, we're going to be fine. So as they started getting into lifeboats, nobody really believed what was happening until the third-class passengers, who were in the hull, essentially, started seeing water. And that was when they all started to realize, no, this is real. So as the ship began to disappear, Titanic's engineers kept the lights on as long as they possibly could. The majority of them perished in the sinking because they were in the hull. The 8 musicians in Titanic's band played until the very last second. None of them survived. Hartley, who was the band's leader, actually his fiance had given him a brand new violin right before he boarded Titanic as an engagement gift, and he knew he wasn't going to make it, so he actually tied it to his life vest. And when his body was recovered, his violin was still there, and they returned it to the family. Now it's in a museum, but it was in the family for a very long time. So while this is all happening, you can see, this is one of the paintings. The lifeboats are all around the ship kind of watching this happen, trying to get away from the people who are in the water, because unfortunately they didn't want to get flooded by people trying to get into their lifeboats. And at 2:20 a.m., Titanic was gone. So as we probably know, the Carpathia reached the spot where Titanic was, got there, and obviously she was gone. But they started to set off flares and fireworks to bring the survivors to them. At 4:10 a.m., Carpathia picked up lifeboat number 2. That was the first lifeboat to bring Titanic survivors aboard. And by 8:50, they had collected all of the survivors. They put the 2 collapsible lifeboats, which were essentially canvas, they left those at the scene, and they took all of Titanic's lifeboats with them back to New York. because unfortunately they were now evidence. So they're heading back to New York, and this whole time everyone is trying to send messages to family. They're sending names to New York so they can publish who survived, and people are trying to tell their loved ones that they're okay. It was so crazy, and the wireless operators had such a hard time keeping up with it, that Harold Bride, who was one of the Titanic's operators, actually stepped in to help. And he had been in the water holding on to one of the collapsible lifeboats. He had severe frostbite on his feet, but he stepped in to help because that's what he did. So we have some pictures from the Carpathia of the survivors. They really banded together to help them, and then obviously turned around and headed to New York. So the arrival in New York was 9 a.m. on April 18th. And before docking in the Cunard dock, the Carpathia went to Pier 59, which was the White Star Pier, and that's actually where Titanic would have docked, and dropped off all of her lifeboats, and then went to Pier 54 to start unloading the survivors. And when they arrived, there were over 50,000 people there waiting. There was family members, loved ones, friends, but of course, tons of media. And at this point, a lot of these people were treated like celebrities because it's the 1910s. This is something that rocked the world. They would get followed by reporters. This picture at the top is two survivors, and all those men surrounding them are from newspapers because everybody wanted to hear their stories. So while they were taken to hospitals to recover, and, getting home, moving to wherever they were supposed to be going in the US or Canada, they were starting to put their lives back together. And this is actually a manifest of the passengers that were picked up by Carpathia. This is just one page of it. So this is where we get into the, albeit tenuous, connection to Central Florida. So the first survivor we are going to talk about, we go from oldest to youngest, is Dr. Alice May Leader. She was a physician, which in the early 1910s was a big deal. She was educated in Philadelphia, and she was a first-class passenger. She was 49 years old and widowed when she boarded the Titanic. She had been on a huge vacation. She went to Panama. She was in Europe. She was traveling with her friend, Mrs. Smith. And while they were on this trip, they met the Kenyans. And they all became friends, and they realized they were all going to be on Titanic together. So the night of the sinking, Leader got, as well as Mrs. Swift and Mrs. Kenyon, got into Lifeboat 8. Mr. Kenyon unfortunately did not make it. But Lifeboat 8 was lowered on the port side at 1 a.m. And Alice was one of the ones, she talked a lot when she got back to New York. She had actually survived a really horrible disaster years earlier with her husband where they were crossing a bridge and the bridge collapsed underneath them. So she was kind of a veteran when it came to disasters. So she was everywhere telling her story, which was great because it helped with the inquiries. They could actually kind of follow what happened. So on April 19th, she recounted her tale to the Sun Journal, and she said that she was heading to bed that night, and the whole ship lurched, and there was a jarring sensation. And after the shock, she went up to the deck to see what was going on, and there was ice everywhere. But she didn't think that they were in danger, so she figured, I'll just go back to what I was doing. But then someone came up to her and said, there's danger at the other end of the ship. The baggage rooms are completely flooded. With that, she still didn't believe it. So she is wandering around looking at the ice, and they say, okay, you're going to get in a lifeboat. So she was in Lifeboat 8 with Countess Roths, who actually had a background in sailing and rowing. So she took command of the ship. There were Titanic crew with each lifeboat to row the lifeboat and help everyone. And she more or less told them to sit down and be quiet, and she took control of the entire thing. And the women were the ones that did all the rowing that night because she wanted it done correctly. So Alice went back to her life after the sinking. She went back to her clinic in New York. She spoke a lot to women's groups about the rescue, and this was kind of, as for most survivors, a defining moment in her life. Something else she did after the sinking was she would visit her sister in Winter Park, and she would make annual visits to her sister, Mrs. A.F. Dwight. And in 1944, she came down for a visit. She unfortunately was suffering from heart failure at this point. And on April 20th, she had a heart attack at the Florida Sanitarium and passed away. Another connection to Central Florida. The funeral director was Eiselstein Wigington of Orlando, and then she was laid to rest in Forest Hill Cemetery in Attica, New York. And you can see there's a picture of her husband as well. And that's actually a news article from the disaster she went through before, where the bridge collapsed underneath them. And they were both doctors, so they were just like, they told everyone their story. It's actually, if you ever look it up, it's actually quite incredible. Our next survivor is Philip Edmund Mock. He was born on August 16th, 1881 in New York City. And he was a 30-year-old artist. When he boarded Titanic, he was with his sister, and they boarded in Cherbourg, France. Like Dr. Leader, they were first-class passengers. They were returning home from from Europe. And it was a business trip. He was a piano salesman. He worked with a manufacturing company. So he was there, and his sister was trying to escape her husband because she wanted a divorce. So she was all about going with him. So he and Emma were on the ship. They shared a cabin on E deck. And because it was first class, they didn't feel the impact like the lower areas of the ship. A lot of them felt the stop and the jolt, but they didn't realize how devastating it actually was. So according to several accounts, Emma refused to get in a lifeboat without her brother, as many of the women did. Finally, she was convinced, coerced, maybe tossed into Lifeboat 11 with Edith Rosenbaum, who was also persuaded into the boat. And as they started to lower it, Edith actually jumped into the lifeboat, and Philip looked around. No one was really watching him, so he jumped in as well. And a lot of the men that survived, a good number of them were first class because they were the first ones there as they were filling the lifeboats. They were just basically like, get everybody in, get everybody off. And, you know, they were the wealthiest, so they survived. After boarding the Carpathia, Philip sent his brother-in-law a telegram informing him that he and Emma were safe. And like most of the other survivors, when they got to New York, he immediately told his story. His is an interesting one because he claims that he saw William T. Stead, who was an author, and Colonel John Jacob Astor, who was of the New York Astors. He was the wealthiest man on the ship. He claimed that he saw them holding on to one of the lifeboats. They were in the water, but they were freezing, and they eventually just let go. There is a common misconception, I don't know how it started, that Astor was crushed by one of the smokestacks when it fell. That is not true. He unfortunately succumbed to hypothermia and technically drowned like a lot of the other victims. So this was something that, of course, no one could verify. Not that they didn't think Philip was telling the truth, but it was everything was hearsay when it comes to what happened that night. So our next person, let's go back. I went too soon. So Philip, after the sinking, became a banker. He got married in 1914, and in 1935, he and his wife came to Florida. They lived at 519 South Atlantic Avenue in Ormond Beach, and he was an art instructor at the Casements, which was a girls' school in Florida, in Ormond. And at the age of 69, he passed away at the Halifax District Hospital in Daytona. But he was, of course, not going to be buried here. He was going to Alabama. So the Carrie Crematory that was in Orlando prepared the body and got it ready to go to Alabama for burial. Our next survivor is Anna Abelson, later Anna Bolton. She was born on September 14th, 1883 in Russia. She was 28 years old and newly married to her husband Samuel when they got on Titanic in Cherbourg. Unfortunately, there's not too much known about her before the sinking, and she was actually one that kept her mouth shut. She didn't want to remember it. She didn't want to talk about it. So it wasn't until a lot later in her life that she started to open up about it. Like many of the other women that night, she was in bed. She was sleeping. She was awoken and got a life jacket. She didn't grab her coat or anything. She was basically just in her nightgown and a robe. So she grabbed the steamer rug that was on the floor of the cabin. And she gets up to the deck. They get her into a lifeboat. She gets into lifeboat 10, and unfortunately, Samuel did not make it. When she gets to New York, she gives a different name for him and her. People didn't know who she was at first because she gave fake names. No one knows why she did it. But she was Anna Abelson at this point. So when she got on the Carpathia, she later said that she was so grief-stricken that she was sick the entire time. She couldn't eat. She had been seasick the entire time she was on the Titanic. And she was one of the lucky ones that got a message out to her brother in Paris to let him know that she had survived, but her husband had not made it. When she got to New York, she was taken to St. Luke's Hospital. She had injuries from exposure because it was freezing that night, and even if you were in a boat, you were cold. When she was in the lifeboat, she had the steamer rug wrapped around her, but there were 2 children in the lifeboat who were shivering, so she took it and she wrapped it around them instead. Part of this was there were law firms in New York that were doing the claims for passengers. So she gets out of the hospital and she's taken to a law firm where she meets Edward Bolton. And they become friends. She's a grieving widow. And eventually their friendship blossoms into romance and they get married in 1920. So that is when she becomes Anna Bolton. She did continue to visit her family. I don't know how any of these people got on ships ever again after this happened, but most of them did. So she would go back and forth to France, but she was so traumatized by April 15th that she would stay up all night on the deck of the ship. She would hang with the stewards. They would bring her sandwiches. They would bring her coffee. She would spend all night on the deck just watching to make sure everything was safe. And when the sun came up, she would go to bed every night. He was a male and they were in second class, so he wasn't allowed in the lifeboat. So in 1958, A Night to Remember premiered. It was based off of Walter Lord's book, and Anna was invited. So she and her husband went to Manhattan, and she recalls being treated like royalty, but of course, she knows how the movie's going to end. So as they get closer and closer to the 15th, she walked out. She said there was absolutely no way that she could sit through the ending of the film. But following her retirement, she and her husband moved to 85 Linda Road in New Smyrna, and the Orlando Sentinel finally tracked her down in 1970. Not because she was a Titanic survivor, but because they were celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary. So they figure out who she is, and she says, I don't want to talk about it. Well, a little before this, she had already opened up and told her story. The Herald Statesman in 1962, she spoke to them and she told them her story. And she refers to her husband by the name Pierre Bourreau. Again, no one knows why. And when she was in the lifeboat with that steamer rug, she held onto it and she said that every single voyage she went on after Titanic, it was kind of her good luck charm. She took it with her. She gave it to her brother when he fought in World War I, so it tramps through Europe with him. she left it in the trunk of her car by this point, and she said it's still in decent shape, but the cat has chewed the fringe off and there's some holes in it, but we still have it. So on January 18th, 1972, Anna passed away and was buried at Daytona Memorial Park. Her husband, Edward, followed shortly after, but he was actually buried in New England, where he was from. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm moving way faster than I thought I was. So our final survivor was one of the youngest that was on the ship. This is Frank John William, or Frankie Goldsmith Jr. He was the youngest survivor that had a connection to Central Florida. He and his family were leaving Kent, England. They were headed to Detroit, Michigan. And you see the family photo here. He is the little boy that's standing. His mother is holding his brother Albert, who unfortunately passed away as a child from diphtheria when he was 6. So by the time they boarded Titanic, it was just Frankie. And he, like most kids, he spent the day with the other kids on the ship. They would run, they would play. He was having a great time. His family had met up with some other acquaintances, Thomas Theobald and Alfred Rush. And the night of the sinking, he was in bed. He was asleep. He was asleep by 8:30, he said. And he woke up because his mom started dressing him. A steward had knocked on the door and said, "This is what's happening. You need to come up to the deck. We need to get you off the ship." And they didn't, like most people, they didn't believe it, but they stepped out of the cabin and saw water coming towards them and ran up to the top deck. By the time the family had gotten up there, the majority of the lifeboats were gone. They actually had a line of crew members who had linked arms that were holding all the men back from the last collapsible lifeboats because they were trying to get the women and children through. So Emily, his mother, and Frankie were pushed through the crowd. The crew let them through to get in a lifeboat, and they even offered a spot to Alfred Rush. He had just turned 16, and he said that he was a man now. He didn't have to wear shorts anymore. He could wear long pants, so he was staying with the men. So unfortunately, along with his father, Frank, and Theobald, they all perished in the sinking. But he and his mother managed to get into Collapsible 2. There's differing accounts. He remembered it as Collapsible D. His mom, at one point, Emily said that she had to jump into the water and then climb into the lifeboat. Most likely, they were beginning to lower it when they put them in, and neither of them got wet because neither of them had any injuries, no hypothermia, there wasn't exposure. So it's very unlikely that either of them got wet as they were trying to get into the lifeboat. All the evidence from other accounts point to them being in Collapsible C. So if anybody looks at this and you see that he says D, the records show otherwise. So they were headed to Detroit. When they got onto the Carpathia, Frank, of course, found other children. He befriended some of the engineers who had survived because they were placed in lifeboats with the passengers. And there was one engineer in particular, Engineer Collins, who befriended Frankie and kept him distracted the whole time they were on the Carpathia to keep his spirits up and so that his mother could kind of grieve and handle things, because when they got to New York, they had to get to Detroit, where her family was. So when they arrived in New York, they were cared for by the Salvation Army, and they were he recalls Mrs. Macy taking him shopping. He got a whole new wardrobe. And they were packed up, all new luggage, all new clothes, because they lost everything. And they were given the train tickets and put on a train to Detroit. Now, at this point, the family in Detroit is waiting. They have no idea what's happening. They know Titanic is gone. They know they have family on it, but they don't know where they are. So it actually was days later until they finally got word that they had made it to New York and that Emily and Frankie had survived. Like many survivors, Frank suffered a lot of trauma. So much so that he grew up next to a baseball stadium, and he said that every time the crowd cheered, it would remind him of the people that were in the water that night while he was in the lifeboat. So he never went to a baseball game, and one of his sons actually remembered when he passed that he never took them to a baseball game because he couldn't handle it, which makes complete sense. Because Frankie was one of the younger survivors, he spoke quite a bit about the experience. He would attend reunions. They would have reunions of survivors, so he met other survivors and became friends with other survivors. He married his wife, Victoria, and had 3 sons. In 1979, Victoria and, Frankie moved to 8874 Big Blue Lane in Orlando. And in April of 1980, he sat down with the Orlando Sentinel to discuss his experience. And you can see this picture of the article. He had some memorabilia. And he recalled putting on life vests, and he just thought they were going to be okay. He saw kids he was playing with. Everyone was on the deck. But once on the deck, he saw his parents kissing, and he felt like something might not be okay. Something's happening. But his father patted him on the shoulder and said, "So long, Frankie, I'll see you later." So he really got into that lifeboat thinking, oh, it's gonna be fine. I'm gonna see him later. He didn't realize until later that night what that actually meant. And he even fell asleep in that lifeboat. There is a famous picture of the survivors coming up to their Carpathia, and you can kind of see a little head popping up. One of the theories is that that's Frankie, but I was unable to corroborate it. It would be really cool if it was Frankie. But he vividly remembered sitting in the lifeboat, his mother trying to turn him away from what was happening, and hearing the ship buckle and hearing it start to tear in half. And he said he cried himself to sleep that night in that lifeboat until they got to Carpathia. On January 27th, 1982, he passed away and was cremated by Carahan Crematory. His wishes were to have his ashes scattered over the spot where Titanic sank. And at first, everyone was kind of like, how are we going to do this? So they started reaching out to people. And on April 15th, 1982, his ashes were scattered from a Coast Guard reconnaissance plane over the spot where Titanic had been found. And then the rest of his family, his wife obviously is not buried with him. So, I'm sorry, I blew through that real fast. I didn't want to talk for too long. Okay, so, do we have any questions?
Our online audience, just to make sure they can hear the questions being asked as well. So if you wouldn't mind just holding your question to the mic, that would be amazing.
All right, I think we have one right here.
You might have said this, but how many survivors were there?
1,517.
That's a good exact number. How many total on the Titanic to begin with?
2,208 were on it. 1,178 survived.
Oh.
It does kind of range. One of the numbers that people have all kind of agreed on is 2,208, but it's really kind of 2,200 to 2,400. Titanic could hold 3,300 passengers, including the crew, but obviously it wasn't at capacity.
What became of the steamer Rug? Is that still around, or is it just gone?
That is a very good question. They never had children when she passed. I'm unsure of what happened to it. Yeah, I don't know. It might have been sold with her belongings. Yeah.
Was there any effort to either the Carpathia or the sister ship to Titanic, I forgot the name you said it was, but was there any conversation or discussion about saving either one of those ships in lieu of their notoriety and the tragedy?
I mean, Not really, because they were working vessels, so they just continued to be used for what they were built for. There's pieces of things that have been kept in museums. Obviously, we know Titanic has been salvaged quite a few times. There's a piece of the hull. There's two pieces. One's in Las Vegas, one's in Orlando. But there are pieces, if I remember correctly, from Merseyside. I think they have pieces of Olympic. I know pieces were saved, but they're kind of scattered. Yes, Cheyenne?
I know that you also worked at the Albin Polaszek Museum. Was there a connection there with Albin and like his friends and the art community and the Titanic?
Remember the story I told you. Yes. So Albin Polaszek was an artist. He was a Czech-American artist. He lived in Winter Park. His house is now a museum. If you haven't been there, highly recommend it. He studied abroad in Rome at the American Academy in Rome. And one of the professors there was Francis Millet. And all of the students had asked Millet to sit for a bust. And every time he said, absolutely not. Well, when Albin asked him, he said yes. So Albin molded a bust of him. There is one at the Polaszek Museum. Unless they moved it, it should be on display on the mantle. And when he finished it, Millet looked at it and said, this bust is going, paraphrasing, but this bust will go on to do great things for you. He finished it in 1911. Millet perished in the sinking in 1912. And right after the disaster, Polaszek was commissioned for, if I remember correctly, it was 10 of those busts of Millet. And like I said, Polaszek has one of them. And there's one, I think there's one at the Art Institute in Chicago, if I remember correctly. Yes. Any other questions?
We have one right here we'll start with.
Yes. Is there an official Titanic museum anywhere? We have these experiences around.
I mean, go ahead and answer it. I was going to say.
Yeah, we're Canadians. We're from Halifax, Nova Scotia. And we've been to the Fairview Cemetery where all of the survivors, all of the people that were brought in terms of the bodies are there. One of them is Jay Dawson, played by DiCaprio, not Jack Dawson, he's Joseph Dawson. But it's a thing that when you visit the cemetery there, you usually leave some type of a token on Jay Dawson's grave, and I left a silver dollar. But there's also a very large Titanic museum in the port there in Halifax. It has a lot of information regarding the wreck, as well as a recreation of the radio center where the information was taken to go to the Carpathia. There's also a life jacket that was taken off of one of the survivors, I believe, that's there. And there's a lot of information because you can look out the windows there. You can sit on one of the recreated boats that are there to pretend that you're actually on the deck of the Titanic. So if anyone ever goes to Halifax, Nova Scotia, be sure to re-plug into the Titanic history because there's a lot there.
There's a lot in Halifax. For the U.S., there's not an official one. So for the U.S., there's a company called RMS Titanic, Inc. They have rebranded themselves, and they've gotten a lot better. But the new director is really trying, but they have exclusive salvage rights to the wreck for the United States. And they do not necessarily do it ethically. They are not following any kind of archaeological grid or anything. They just go down, grab what they want, and bring it back up. The only rule is a lot of things like leather shoes, because the way leather was treated at that time, it doesn't deteriorate the way other things do. So there are still leather bags down there and leather shoes. They usually leave the shoes because essentially they're kind of like a grave marker. But if you go to the exhibits, there are shoes in the exhibits. So they might have come off survivors. Unfortunately, they may have come off some of the recovered bodies. So in the U.S., there's not really an official one. There's the one in Orlando is they just changed their name. They were Premier Exhibitions, which RMS Titanic owns, is a part of. They own all the traveling artifact exhibitions. So when you see like, oh, this is coming to New York, that's them. There's some kind of new VR immersive thing in Tampa that I don't think that has any artifacts or anything. I think it's a VR thing. I haven't looked into it. But then in Pigeon Forge and Branson, there are two very, very big Titanic museums. They are owned by, if I remember correctly, it's the Jocelyn family. And they essentially built the front half of the ship, and that is the museum. And it's really cool because when you go in, they used, if I remember correctly, they used plans of the ship. So it's like you're going through the ship. They have the hallways, they have a music room, you walk out onto the bridge. So, I mean, if you're going to go to one in the States, I would recommend Pigeon Forge or Branson. They have the violin, they have Hartley's violin. They have the pocket watch that stopped at 2:20 a.m. when it hit the water. They have some really interesting things. I suckered my now husband into visiting one. He was my guinea pig when I wrote my thesis. I would follow him around and see how he reacted to things. But I would highly recommend that. In the UK, White Star Line was Liverpool. The Merseyside Maritime Museum has a Titanic exhibit. It was supposed to be temporary, but it was so well received and so busy that I had spoken to their curator several years ago, and she was like, we made it permanent. People would come in and be like, where's the Titanic exhibit? Before they created one, and they would be really disappointed that there wasn't one. That one is really interesting because it goes more into the history of the Ismay family, because they owned the White Star Line. So they have some things that belong to Bruce Ismay and his family. They have like their chandelier from their living room. And then you go through and there's about the ship and what happened. They don't have a ton of Titanic artifacts. There's some, but that one's also really cool to see. And then the big one besides Halifax is Belfast. Right next to Harland and Wolff Shipyard is Titanic Belfast, and that was specifically built as a Titanic museum. It's designed to kind of look like the bow of the ship. And when you go there, I haven't been there yet, it's on the list. When you go there, they still have the crane and everything that was built at the Harland and Wolff Shipyard specifically to build the Olympic class ships. They had to completely overhaul the shipyard so that they could build them. But that one is really cool. They have like a dark ride that kind of takes you through the story. And they actually just did, I think I posted on social media the other day, they just did a thing with drones on the water right outside the museum where they used 900 drones, and it's really cool because they're all along the water, and as they rise into the shape of Titanic. I think that answered your question.
We need to talk.
Yes, we do.
Thank you for spending so much time on the Goldsmith family.
Of course.
Frankie Goldsmith, 9-year-old survivor, was my dad. And I heard the story from him and from my grandmother, Emily. They didn't talk about it in the family. I was the only one in the family that ever heard her talk about it, and it was a kitchen table conversation. Aww. When I had come home from classes at the local college. Grandma and Grandpa lived next door to me, so I would stop in there for lunch. And she got talking about the Titanic, and she talked for an hour or so. I was 19. Aww. I didn't hear my dad tell the story till I was 33, when I booked him into my Sunday school class. And I was the one in the back asking the questions.
That's fantastic. Yes, we need to talk.
He was a delightful guy, and I spent his last day with him. My wife and my daughter and I had gone down to my parents' home and just had an afternoon and evening and supper or something. And when I got home that night and I was getting ready for bed, I got a call from Mom, and she said, I think your dad has had a stroke, and they're taking him to the hospital, and he did not survive. And that was the date of his father's birthday, January 27th.
Yeah. Thank you. Any other questions?
I'm curious about the culpability for that disaster. Did that ever fall on the captain of the ship's shoulders, or later on, legally, or?
For what happened?
Yes.
After all of the inquiries, it kind of fell on him, but there were more to blame than just him. I mean, the lookouts didn't have their binoculars. They couldn't see very far. The ship was going faster than it should have been in an ice field because they had a set date to get to New York, and they were trying to beat that and get there the night before to prove that they were the fastest. It kind of fell on his shoulders, but not really. The White Star Line took the brunt of it because they designed the ship, they commissioned the ship, they were the ones that were blamed for what happened. Actually,
that warning for icebergs was sent out to all the ships in that shipping lane. Well, do you know what the response was from those other ships? Did they stop, turn around, or what?
most of the other ships in the area, the Californian was 10 miles away, and that's the one, if you've ever read A Night to Remember by Walter Lord, his father or grandfather was the captain of the Californian. They actually stopped because they were surrounded by ice and they did not want to take any chances. So as Titanic was steaming ahead, they had stopped because they were in an ice field. But where Titanic was, they didn't see any ice. They were getting the warnings, but all they could see was just the clear sea around them. It wasn't until they were basically on top of the iceberg that they saw it. Yes.
It was said that the Titanic was actually sailing further north than they thought that they were, which was a real problem in the rescue efforts. Was that the case, that they were actually not where they were supposed to be?
They had actually moved north because of the ice warnings and because of the ice fields. They were basically trying to go around it, and that was a route that ships could take at that time. That was kind of like an alternate route. I don't want to say that it made the rescue harder, because when they were sending out the CQD, and at the time SOS had just come out, so the wireless operators started to use SOS, because if you see the movie, the one that perished was like, might be the only time we get to use it, but they were sending out their coordinates, so everyone knew exactly where they were. But that's a good question. Yes, they were a little farther north than they normally would have been. Yes.
Didn't the sister ship also sink?
So she asked if the sister ship also sank, for those online.
Yes, Britannic was a hospital ship in World War I, and it hit a German mine. Yeah, and it sank. Olympic survived, but Olympic actually right before Titanic, while they were building Titanic, Olympic was back at the shipyard because it had hit another ship. So it was there for repair. They were being built at the same time, but then it came back for repair. But yes, Britannic also sank. Yes.
Do you know any? Oh, I don't know if is this on. Oh, okay. Do you know anything about the process that immigrants on the ship went through at Ellis Island? I've heard there's a little bit of like a process there, and I haven't really heard anybody talk about it.
I've heard a little bit about it, but Frank, if you want to.
They didn't stop at Ellis Island. They went straight into New York. A couple months later, Grandma and Dad went back to England, and they returned on the Carpathia, and they stopped at Ellis Island and were registered in July of 1912. I didn't know about that until a few years ago when my older brother was doing some research and discovered that their names were in Ellis Island, said, how did that happen? And we put the whole story back together and figured out why they went back to England. Grandma had Mr. Theobald's wedding ring and had promised to give it to his wife if he didn't make it to New York. So they went back to England, and she met with Mrs. Theobald, gave her the ring, saw in-laws and family that were still in England, and my dad got to go to school and see his school buddies, and then they returned on the Carpathia. I don't know how they got to England. It may have been on the Carpathia too. They may have had a round trip. It certainly was a ship they could trust.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Hello. So I have 2 questions for you.
Okay.
My first can everybody hear me? Oh, you're good. How many children were on the ship exactly?
There were. I made myself a cheat sheet, and I don't remember. It was like 50 or something. There weren't as many as people think there were. And unfortunately, a lot of the third-class children did that.
Yikes. And then my second question is, was the ship mostly like international? Like, was it mostly like American international, like passengers?
Yes. Yeah, they had passengers, mostly from Europe, some from Russia, definitely a lot of Americans in first class and second class, but a lot of the third class was immigrants from other countries, and good number of second class as well. They were coming to the States. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Oh, I just got texted an answer. 135 kids. There's a little girl, if you ever look her up, Lorraine Allison. She was 4. She was the only child in first class that didn't make it. That was the first story I ever researched when I was a kid. Any more questions? Am I out of time? Yes, I'm out of time.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Let's give Emily a huge round of applause. Woohoo! So thank you again, Emily, for that. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed today's program. Supporting our programming is one of the best ways to support the History Center in general. So we appreciate you being here today. If you want to learn more about how you can support us and or get involved, you can take a look at what's going on our website, which is